We're going to get started in just a moment as our speakers come in and fill in behind me. A reminder one more time for folks who are dialed into our conference line to please keep your lines muted until the end of the press conference. You will have an opportunity to ask your questions at the end of the press conference. Just as a note, we do have one speaker that needs to leave before the event is over, but everyone else should be available for questions at the end of the event. So with that, I'd like to introduce Governor Jay Inslee.
We just lost somebody here. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's one of your many great jobs you're doing right now. Go Garfield Bulldogs. This epidemic of gun violence we're suffering in the state of Washington is unacceptable. And we know that Washington State is not passive, and we do not have to surrender to this scourge of gun violence. We know we can act, we know we should act, and we know we will act this session of the legislature. And the reason is Washingtonians demand assertive, effective, and protective gun safety laws. And we intend in this session of the legislature to give Washingtons assertive, effective, and protective laws to protect them and their children against this epidemic of gun violence. Now, before I talk about our gun safety laws, I want to make this clear. Our gun safety laws are not the only thing we're going to do to fight gun violence. We are going to provide more mental health to our young people. We are going to attack the homelessness crisis. We are going to train more police officers so that there are more officers on the streets to protect us. But we also have to have something that goes to the heart of gun violence, which is that too many guns of the wrong kind are in the wrong hands. And the laws we will propose today are aimed at keeping the wrong guns out of the wrong hands. We know these laws can be effective, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But let me just set the stage. When I say epidemic of gun violence, I mean an epidemic of gun violence. We lose over 800 Washingtonians a year to gun violence. Today, gun violence, and this is shocking to me, is the leading cause of death of our young people, above car accidents, above cancer. This is what is killing our kids more than anything else. Nearly 6,000 kids have been hurt or killed last year. We have over 600 mass shootings every year in the United States. 23 Washingtonians died last month as a result of gun violence. Gun violence is an epidemic, and it is going to increase if we do not take action. Our rate of gun death is not only the highest in the United States, in the world, it is 4 times higher than any other nation. Now, other nations have difficulties in mental health. Other nations have people who get in arguments. But we have this scourge of gun violence because of the presence of the wrong kind of guns in the wrong hands. And that's what these laws are intended to protect, that we intend to introduce. So we will be introducing bills to ban assault weapons, to create an appropriate level of liability for gun manufacturers, and importantly, in the bill that I will talk about in some depth right now, is a permit to purchase bill that will treat guns with the severity that they deserve. You need to get a license to drive a car in the state of Washington. You need to get a license to go fishing. It's time that you get a license to make sure that you have safety training to purchase a gun in the state of Washington. And it's high time that we pass a bill to make sure you get a permit before you purchase a firearm. Now, why is this necessary? I guess it goes without saying. We know we've got an epidemic. We know we need to take action. And when you look around the suite of things that are actually effective, this might be the single most important, in my view, thing we can do. We know that it's effective. After the shooting in Connecticut, they passed a permit to purchase bill. And they had about a 40% reduction in gun violence as a result. States that have gone the other way to remove gun safety laws have had a 60% increase in gun violence in their states. These laws work. They work because they make sure people have safety training. They make sure that we give us time to do an adequate background check. They work because there is some modest delay so that when you're a fit of anger or you're in a desirous to commit a crime, you can't get a gun in the first 30 minutes. These are common sense measures that in some degree provide us adequate protection. And that's why we will be introducing, as the governor's request legislation, a law to require a permit to purchase or receive and transfer a gun in the state of Washington. We think that this is not only common sense, but we believe it will be very, very effective in this scourge. Now, it's just one of the bills, but it is an important one. Let me touch on the assault weapon ban. I voted for an assault weapon ban in 1994. I believed it was the right vote then. I believe it's the right vote now. The mass shootings we are experiencing are epidemic. These are the things that penetrate police officers' body armor, about 25% when police officers are shot with assault weapons. These are weapons of war. There is no legitimate reason for them in our society. We know that these mass shootings continue to proliferate, and this is a common sense measure to protect our people. So in closing, I just want to say this touches me every time I read about this. Because what used to be an argument in a parking lot that might end up in a fist fight, there's now somebody dead in the street that doesn't go home to their families. What used to be a fist fight at Ingraham High School when I was there in 1969 was a fatal shooting of a young man in the school I went to. We cannot surrender to this epidemic. And I think the first order of business for us as a state is to recognize that we are going to take action. Look, I refuse to accept that we're powerless here. We know we can take action, and we had to bend our efforts to do that in this legislative session. And I think we got a fair shot at getting these bills through, in part because we got a great Attorney General who's pushing safety in a lot of different ways, including his retail sales theft task force, our efforts to increase our training of additional police officers. Thanks for Bob Ferguson and his leadership. Come on up, Bob.
Thank you, Governor. And we are lucky indeed in the state that we're led by a governor who cares so deeply and leads on these issues. Please join me in thanking Governor Inslee for your leadership over many years.
Wait a minute. We have an issue here.
Oh my gosh. Is there a doctor here? Does anybody have any medical experience here?
Are they breathing normally?
So first, round of applause for Frank, who's back on his feet. And a round of applause for the first responders. I think it was Tukwila Fire Department, Tukwila Fire Department. We're here so quickly. And all the individuals, we had city council members, we had individuals helping Frank out. So a round of applause for all of you who helped out Frank as well. On behalf of everybody here, we so obviously appreciate our local media and the coverage you provide and how important service you provide. So it's good to see you back on your feet, Frank. Yeah. The governor did have one point he wanted me to emphasize, which is he was not speaking when Frank had his moment there. It wasn't his speech that caused that. That I was actually at the podium when it happened. So with that said, I think I just started and was mentioning that after thanking the governor, I wanted to mention that when it comes to common sense gun reform, the people are way ahead of the politicians on these issues. You look at any poll on the issues the governor talked about. You look at not just polls, but election results, right? When there are initiatives on the ballot about common sense gun reform, they are overwhelmingly supported by Washingtonians. And so I think collectively, this is our effort to meet the people where they are on addressing this challenge. I'm going to be brief because we have so many speakers, but the governor mentioned the proposal to ban the sale of assault weapons. I believe this is the seventh year that I propose as agency request, and honored to have the governor joining on that again this year with that as well. The prime sponsors you'll be hearing from, Senator Kuderer and Representative Peterson, so they'll be speaking in more detail about it. I will just simply say that with the passage last year, thank goodness, and great appreciation to the legislature for passing the ban on high-capacity magazines. I do feel now with a focus on the ban on the sale of assault weapons, I feel there's a real opportunity here for the legislature to get that law, that important law, passed. It's important for many reasons, but it is worth pointing out that assault weapons are 7 times more likely to kill law enforcement than any other firearm. The bill I'm going to spend just a minute speaking about is a new proposal, unlike the ban on the sale of assault weapons, which again is the 7th year we're attempting it. This other bill I'm going to speak on briefly is new. It's a bill that's prime sponsored by Senator Jamie Peterson and Representative David Hackney. They're also both going to speak, so I'm just going to really set this up. But this is a bill that will ensure that firearms manufacturers and sellers face consequences, liability, when they are irresponsible. So right now, taking a complicated issue and trying to make it as simple as possible, there's a federal law out there. It's called the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. It's commonly referred to as PLACA, okay, PLACA Act. This bill, which was passed in Congress some years ago, grants broad immunity for those manufacturers and sellers, even if they're irresponsible in how they sell or manage these dangerous weapons. It protects them from liability. As an example, before PLACA was passed, the families of Beltway sniper victims were able to successfully sue a Tacoma gun store and gun maker because the weapon that was used in those shootings was stolen from the gun store, and the owners had no idea the firearm was even missing, and they had to pay over $2 million to the family for their irresponsible act. Well, when the federal law was passed, that made those kinds of lawsuits virtually non-existent. However, in this federal law, there's an exception. If states take action, and that's what our bill is proposing, if states take a certain action, they can provide that liability under state law, so those victims can bring a lawsuit if a manufacturer or a seller is irresponsible in how they handle, store, or sell those weapons, or as Attorney General, I can bring those as well. But you have to have a state law in place to do it. States are starting to do this. New York, California, Delaware, New Jersey, I believe, are examples of states that have taken this action, and that's what our bill proposes to do. It requires at a high level the firearm industry members to establish, implement, and enforce reasonable controls on the manufacture, sale, distribution, importing, use, and marketing of their products. And if they don't, if those weapons get in the wrong hands, and the tragic outcomes that we are all too familiar with occur on their watch, and as a result of their actions, then these lawsuits can be brought. Just a final thought, there are so many folks who have been so instrumental on the fight on these issues for so long. Many of them and organizations are standing here behind us and are in the audience today. I will say, and I know I've talked to the governor about this as well, one particular group that's been particularly inspiring, I think, for me, and I think I can say with the governor as well, is the young people. I've been with the governor on marches with young people, rallies, thousands of young people out there who want their voices, demand that their voices be heard on this issue, because guess what? It impacts them when they walk in their classrooms, for God's sakes, right? And just live their lives. And it's a good reminder for all of us when young people stand up and are willing to get in front of a room full of people and talk about their own experience. And so we're honored to have a senior from Ingram High School, the governor's alma mater, of course, Sophie Blaziova, who's here to share her thoughts as well. Sophie.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Sophie Blazhayova, and I'm a senior at Ingram High School. I want to read you a text that I wrote my sister the morning of November 8th. I'm in lockdown right now, possible gunshots. If anything happens, I love you so much. We learned that day a kid fired a semi-automatic weapon at least 5 times within my school. It is hard to put into words the amount of fear that I felt. Fear for my friends, fear for my community, and fear for myself. Fear that no child should ever feel. I've been a gun control activist since the Stoneman Douglas shooting of 2018, where an expelled student opened fire and killed 17 people. After reading accounts of students hiding in classrooms and closets to be safe, I thought I understood what happens during a school shooting, but I did not. I never fully understood how quietly you try to cry, how every part of your body is telling you to run, how you and your peers are cramped under the same table, and how many hours you wait to hug your parents and friends. After the shooting, I responded by comforting my grieving community and created action that I wasn't seeing from the adults around me. But as the conversation shifted from gun reform to preventative measures, I found myself angry that every solution proposed required students to step up. These children now have the responsibility to create safe, secure schools. Even before I turned 18, the fear of gun violence was imbued into me. I remember practicing lockdown drills, learning how to use a textbook as protection, and how to be perceptive of my surroundings. All I can think about now are the children who do the exact same things in fear of what I went through. Within this year alone, we have seen this issue 284 times, making gun violence the #1 killer of children. Every time we try to justify our lack of action, our lack of prevention with thoughts and prayers, or by blaming a bad egg, we are ignoring a systemic issue that has stolen thousands of children's lives. But I refuse to do that anymore. I refuse to let one more child sit in a cramped corner of a dark classroom sending a text like I did. I refuse to let one more child die. So, to the lawmakers and public servants here today, I demand that we ban assault rifles. I demand a permit to purchase firearms. I demand justice for victims of gun violence. I demand gun reform. And I demand that we do not lose any more lives to preventable gun violence. I would now like to pass it to Kiana Pickett.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kiana Rose Pickett. I'm the wife of Devon Pickett Jr., who was murdered on October 19th this year, 2022, in front of our business by somebody who was his friend at one point. So it wasn't, for me, that's one of the saddest things, is that somebody you love can find hate in their heart to want to harm you in a way that you can't come back from. And I feel like it's important to figure out solutions that prevent that. How do you go from friend to foe when somebody's successful and doing for their community and their family? So I'm hoping that we can find some solutions around mental health and gun safety. Devon and I, we went to the gun range. We practiced shooting guns. We believed in our Second Amendment right, and we believed that having that experience and education behind weapons is important, because then you have a responsibility that you understand how powerful it is. With our children, we spent time with them talking about weapons and guns. They touched them themselves, and to understand it's not a video game, that these are real things that can hurt somebody. And Devon believed that with that education, like he spent a lot of time before he went and got his permit and license studying on the laws and what it means to be a black man able to carry a weapon, hoping that it would protect him. He was just locking up. We just stopped by the store. We were the executives of our business, so we weren't there every day. This person sat out for hours waiting, and I happened to be there and seen it happen, and those are just sounds and images that don't escape you. And I have 3 children who, they're sad, they're angry, they miss their dad, and it's like torn our family apart. So just these incidents, they're not just single incidents, they like go on for generations, hundreds, thousands of years. So how do we come up with solutions that are going to combat that for hundreds and thousands of years, so that we can be more family and community and love each other, and have solutions that maybe we go to a gun range together and let off some steam. I think that would be good for kids to do that early versus not having that education. Devon and I worked in Seattle Public Schools prior to opening our business, so we definitely believe in educating the kids and being there early on, planting those seeds. And I just hope that my words, they plant a seed in you, and that we can work together on solutions. And now I'm going to introduce Senator Kudar.
Well, you've heard the stories, and it makes your heart ache, but having an aching heart is not enough. We're done coddling the gun lobby, and we can't sit around and wait for the national level to act. Here in Washington, we will continue to stand up to special interest groups like the NRA, whose only response to gun violence is to demand easier access to guns and weapons of war. They claim that this will solve the nationwide crime problem, but it won't, and it hasn't. I've spoken to students. They want adults to act like adults, and they are angry that they are not safe in their schools. I don't blame them. Kids and students feeling unsafe in their own classrooms is an absolute moral failing of this country. This year, we've had mass shootings in every corner of our state, from Seattle, Mount Vernon, Renton, Tacoma, Vancouver, Sunnyside, and Spokane. There is literally no place you can go without the potential of being involved in a shooting incident. To date, there have been over 620 mass shootings in the U.S., marking a year where we Americans have experienced nearly 2 mass shootings a day. These deadly events end lives, ruin futures, and leave families and communities devastated, all in a matter of seconds. Washington has contributed nearly 1 mass shooting a month to this injury and death toll. That's over 50 of our neighbors, friends, loved ones injured or killed. And the ripple effect, as you heard, of gun violence just continues to grow. Lax gun laws are the root cause of this devastation. But the good news is that we have the power to change that. And as we chart a path to a safer, more welcoming Washington, you will hear the opposition say again, more guns make our community safer. But I remind you that for the past 20 years, we've done it the NRA way. For the past 20 years, we have allowed almost anyone and everyone to equip themselves like soldiers without the smallest measure of regulation and discipline that our armed forces undergo. Those opposing gun safety laws will say the assault weapons ban accounts for only 3% of gun deaths. We'll tell that to the parents of the children of Uvalde and the other murdered children who we continue to mourn. The U.S. stands alone in the world in the sheer level of gun violence we experience. It is the responsibility of every lawmaker at every level of government to pass effective gun safety policies to reduce the number of these weapons in our communities, making our communities safer for all of us. And now I would like to turn it over to another champion for gun safety legislation, my colleague, Senator Jamie Peterson.
Thank you, Senator Cooter. I have 4 kids in Seattle Public Schools who go every day, and every day as I send them off, I hope that they're going to be okay. 10 years ago, my son Trigva was just about to go to kindergarten when the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School happened. And I vowed from that time that I was going to work to make sure that kids in our state are safe when they go to school. Trigva is now a freshman at Garfield High School, and it was chilling to me to hear about the shooting that happened at Ingram High School. Chilling and unacceptable. I remember so vividly on the floor debate in the Senate on the high-capacity magazine ban that we passed this last session, one of my colleagues from across the aisle stood up and said, well, this is just normal. These are normal capacity magazines. And my reaction was, there is nothing normal about those magazines. There's nothing normal about the violence that we are accepting in our society, in our communities, and in our schools. We have a responsibility to act, and we are going to continue to act this session. I'm proud to be working with the Governor's Office and the Attorney General's Office on the liability bill that's going to say that gun manufacturers and retailers have to accept responsibility for these dangerous products that they sell. And if they fail to do the job that they're required to do to keep guns out of the hands of folks who are going to use them to do damage to our fellow residents of the state of Washington, then those people who suffer as a result of their negligence are going to have their day in court. We're going to make sure that that happens so that those victims have justice. And hopefully, when that starts to happen, there will be a set of incentives on manufacturers and retailers to help us keep guns out of the hands of people who are going to do bad things with them. I'm delighted to be working on this bill with one of my favorite colleagues in whose district we are right now, Representative David Hackney, and would like to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Senator. Welcome to the 11th Legislative District. I am honored to be the prime sponsor to the Access for Justice for Victims bill in the Washington State House of Representatives, which holds both retailers and manufacturers responsible for their unreasonable business practices. This bill is important to me for 2 reasons. One, I am a gun violence survivor. When I was 15, my best friend was shot to death by another teenager who should have never had access to a firearm. And I represent South King County here in the 11th Legislative District, which experiences over 70% of the gun violence in King County. I want to make it clear, more guns does not make my community safer. And for those businesses who flood markets with guns to make profits and cause unreasonable harm, they will be held accountable. They'll be held accountable under the leadership of Governor Inslee, of Attorney General Bob Ferguson, and this community. Thank you. Now I'd like to turn it over to another champion to prevent gun violence, Representative Strom Peterson.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out today. Attorney General Ferguson noted that this is 7 years that we've introduced the assault weapons ban, and I have sponsored that bill every year, every one of those 7 years, because of the mass shooting in Mukilteo. So I can't say, kind of go on without mentioning, especially my constituent and friend Paul Kramer, who's been a champion. His son was injured during that shooting, and of course lives were lost. Also, just real quickly, also want to acknowledge Senator David Frocht, who's in the back of the room, who should be up here despite his early retirement, because he has been a champion of the assault weapons ban and so much work that we have accomplished in Washington State. But let's face it, often, when we're out on the campaign trail or we're talking to people and they call us leaders, that's not true. The real leaders are the young people standing behind me, the grandmothers against gun violence, the communities that are rising up to make sure that we do the right thing. I think also, as Attorney General Ferguson said, the legislature and elected leaders are often behind the people. We kind of trail, and this is that case. We need to ban these weapons of war. We've been trying, we've been failing, but I think this is the year to do it because the people are speaking. It seems every mass shooting that happens around the country, I might call or text or email Attorney General Ferguson and say, we're introducing this bill again, right? And of course he writes back, he says, absolutely. I'm sick of sending those messages to him. So this is the year that we have to do it. This is the year where Washington can lead again. Washington, we did great work last year with the high-capacity magazine ban. So proud to have been part of that legislation over, again, 6 or 7 years. So now's the time. Now's the time to get rid of these weapons of war. Now's the time to make our communities safer. Now's the time for people like Sophie to not fear going to school. Thank you, Sophie, for those incredible words. Now is the time to make sure that our community leaders, like Hannah, feel safe when they're going to work. And this is how we do it. These simple pieces of legislation. Politically, they might be complicated, but for the people of Washington State, they are straightforward. Get rid of weapons of war. Make it harder to easily access guns when you're in a fit of despair or a fit of anger. Simple things that we can do and we must do this year. And one of those people that has helped champion these things, despite her very few years in the State House of Representatives, another incredible champion, and one that when we get this through will be a leader on gun violence, is Representative Liz Berry.
My son George is a first grader this year, the exact same age as 20 children who were murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary 10 years ago. So George and I talked about this last week before I sent him off to school, because it's important for him to understand why he and his classmates will hide under their desk and practice active shooter drills. I am a survivor. My life changed forever 11 years ago when a gunman opened fire at a constituent event of my boss and mentor, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. 6 people were killed that day, including my friend and colleague, Gabe Zimmerman. Gabe is the first congressional staffer to be killed in the line of duty. My pain inspires my activism. And as a mother and as a lawmaker, I believe we must do more to protect our kids and families than offering thoughts and prayers. And I believe the people of this great state need to know that if we work together, we can do serious things about these serious problems. We have passed in just 2 years some remarkable pieces of legislation to keep people safe in this state. We have pro-gun safety majorities in the legislature, and the voters of this state expanded those pro-gun safety majorities in the House and Senate, and we intend to use them again this year. This session, I will work with anyone who is willing to fight to protect kids and families. No one should be shot to death at work, at school, in their church, or at the grocery store. We will work to pass an assault weapons ban like that killed my friend Gabe. I am looking forward to working with the governor. I will be introducing the permit to purchase bill in the House with a 10-day mandatory waiting period and training requirement. And we will hold the gun industry responsible for all of the families it has destroyed. Because no mother should have to talk to their kid about school shootings like I had to last week with my son George. Thank you. I would like to introduce my friend Renee Hopkins, the CEO of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Berry. I want to start today with thank yous. Thank you to Reps Hackney and Peterson, Senators Cooter and Peterson, two Petersons, spelled differently, for dedicating the time and energy to sponsor these really important life-saving bills. Thank you to all of our other electeds in the room with us this morning, and yes, a shout out to David Frocht, without whom we would not be where we are today in Washington State. Thank you to Kiana and Sophie for your willingness to share your stories with us and for demanding action. I know that that's really hard. Thank you to all of the gun violence prevention advocates, those with us in the room today, and the tens of thousands of those across our state who have voted again and again for responsible gun laws, and elected people who will do the same thing in the legislature. And last but certainly not least, thank you to Governor Inslee and Attorney General Ferguson for your years of leadership on this issue. Together, we have really gotten a lot done. Last week marked the 10th anniversary of Sandy Hook. The Alliance was founded in the aftermath of that tragedy. And in the last decade, we have made remarkable progress. We passed 3 ballot measures, sending the message to our legislatures that the people are demanding action. And more than 35 community safety bills passed through the state legislature in the past decade. We have written the playbook for other states, and now finally the federal government is starting to follow as well. And we are not backing down. Gun violence is a complex, multifaceted public health issue that requires a comprehensive approach. That is why our 2023 legislative agenda is our boldest yet. We are not backing down because gun violence continues to take a devastating toll on our communities in every corner of Washington State. Rates of gun violence surged in 2020 with the onset of the pandemic, and all initial data suggests that they have not slowed down. We are not backing down because too many Washington families continue to suffer the unthinkable pain that Kiana's family has. We are not backing down because thousands of students like Sophie marched through the streets of Seattle this fall, demanding action to prevent them from being gunned down in their classrooms. And we are not backing down because we know the policies you heard about today will make our community safer. Legislators, Washington expects you to build on the progress you've made. Washington also expects the governor to sign these bills into law. We will not back down because literally lives depend on it. So thank you, everyone, and I think we're going to open for questions.
Yeah, before we do that, before we open for questions, there's 2 comments that I'd like to make. First off, the grandmothers against gun violence have done such great work, and I want to particularly note one grandmother, Trudy Inslee, who has been with me since I voted for the assault weapon bill in 1994 that was a law of the United States for 10 years and then expired, and then you saw an explosion of mass shootings, most of which are involved with these weapons of war. And we are now the grandparents for the 5th and 6th time. And the question for Washington State fundamentally is, are my 2 grandkids, or all our grandkids, going to have to live in a normal Washington that is a scourge of gun violence? We should not accept this as normal. It is abnormal, and we have to act if we're going to change the course of the history of this state. Second thing we haven't talked about today, but we really need to, and that is gun violence to yourself, taking your life by suicide, gun violence by your husband or your son or daughter that is caused by the presence of a gun in your home. If there is a pistol in your home, your family members are much, much, much more likely to be injured by that pistol than some intruder in your home. That's the real risk of guns in your home. To yourself, to your husband, to your son. We lost 2 sons of congressmen when I was in the U.S. Congress to suicide by gun. And the presence of those guns that were now available to anyone without an adequate background check, because we don't have time, without any safety training at all to be able to get it, to talk about how you protect your family from being injured by this gun, how you understand safe storage, how you understand telling everybody in your family how dangerous they are if it's in your house. We don't require any of those things right now. We should. This is a safety measure for the families of the state of Washington against suicide. With that, any of us will be happy to stand for your questions.
Good morning, Governor Inslee. Some of the feedback that we're getting from our platform at Converge Media, we're in the Central District, everything else, is like how committed. Everybody knows that the guns have been everywhere. When I was a student there at Garfield a generation ago, friends murdered, my son, his friends murdered. So, like, we know there's always been too many guns. They've been out there on the street and everything else. Now, separate from this bill, one thing that you mentioned was investment in resources around mental health and safety. Can you expand upon that? Because a lot of times it's just lip service for our community. Like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and the dollars never make it in there to make a real systemic change in our community.
Yeah. Well, this is a very important point. It's one of the first things I talked about. Look, gun safety regulation, gun safety measures are not the only thing we need to do. And I say this very early in my comments because I think when we talked about gun safety, it ends up buying, now my solution's the only one. And then the other guy says, no, my solution's the only one. No, mental health is the only solution, or gun safety is the only solution. We need to do all of these things with real dollars and real plans. And I can tell you with assurance, we are doing that. My budget I just announced a few days ago has literally billions of dollars to increase our commitment to mental health across the state of Washington, with new hospitals, new community centers, with new psychiatrists. We're just opened up a teaching hospital. First one in the United States in mental health teaching hospital designed to do that, associated with the UW. And as our Ingram students told me, they are desperate for mental health professionals in their schools. That's why we're putting hundreds of millions of dollars that were both last year and continuing in my budget this year. I'm confident legislators, they've all guaranteed me they're going to vote for my budget. They're not going to change it at all. That they're going to make sure that those dollars get there. So your point is well taken, and go Bulldogs. You got a great Bulldog running the city, by the way, right now.
That's right. Don't forget that.
I won't. I won't.
It was your dad, 1955, who was assistant coach, Garfield's first championship.
1955. I have that trophy in my trophy case. I'll send you a picture of it. Who won it in 1969, though? You might want to ask.
Governor Inslee, Jeremy with Como News. How do these proposals navigate the potential conflicts with federal law regarding firearm sale restrictions?
So I'm going to ask the Attorney General to talk about that because we got a real expert here.
Thanks, Governor. And the question again was how these proposals
handle potential conflicts with federal regulation on firearm sales.
You bet. So a couple thoughts. Others may want to elaborate on it. But as an example, just taking a couple as an example, banning the sale of assault weapons. Multiple states have done that. Federal courts across the country have upheld those. They are constitutional, right? So that's something that's been done by other states. Courts have reviewed those, and they've been upheld. On the new proposal around liability, I think I mentioned there's a federal law that grants a lot of protections for these retailers and manufacturers, but that federal law does contain a specific exception if states choose to utilize it. So we're not simply proposing a state law that's in contrast or contradiction of that federal law, LACA. In fact, it is utilizing an exception that federal law contemplates and is explicit about, and that essentially invites states to say, hey, if you want to provide that level of liability on folks who don't take reasonable steps, you can do that. And so, like all things, there's litigation around those things. Courts have upheld those around the country. And so, as you might also imagine, my legal team is here. We are working carefully with our sponsors, legislators, to make sure we are crafting this in a way that is consistent with that federal law. But it's important to underscore that federal law does contemplate. It has a specific exception for states who want to take the action that we're proposing today. So, long story short, we believe these actions, each of them, are very consistent with federal law.
Do you anticipate any precedent-setting challenges as a result of these new proposed Washington laws?
Yeah, so one thing that is certain is anytime the people of the state through the initiative process or the legislature take action on common sense gun reform, there's going to be a lawsuit challenging that. And that's just part of the way our system works, and that's appropriate. I can report that I think we have had 6 outcomes on different laws adopted by the people or by the legislature related to common sense gun reform. And on 6 of those, the record of my office defending those laws is pretty good. We've won all 6 of them. So we feel confident that we'll be able to defend these laws. But we spend a lot of time in the crafting and drafting of these to make sure we're doing that in a way that we think is consistent with law and is defensible when that inevitable lawsuit does come challenging those laws. Thank you. Yes, go right ahead. Yes.
It's been 7 years, as you mentioned, since you've attempted to pass this assault weapons ban. Just lessons learned along the way. What are the key reasons stopping the passage of this?
Oh, others I'm sure will want to weigh in. And I'll just offer a quick thought first. So yes, it's the 7th year on the proposal on banning the sale of assault weapons. A couple of things. I do feel optimistic about it this year, in large part because for each of the past 6 years, we are proposing that as well as banning the sale of high-capacity magazines. Both are, by any measure, heavy lifts and consequential legislation. And last year, so grateful the legislature adopted that ban on high-capacity magazines. So I think it's fair to say that there was a bit more of a focus around high-capacity magazines. You got to focus on your bill. That is now done. So I think that also creates some bandwidth to focus on this. And I do feel that there's just a momentum that's been growing with the people of the state, unfortunately in large part due to news that you read literally every day about mass shootings and the weapons that are invariably used in those mass shootings. And I think that as tragic as those outcomes are, I think it has galvanized elected officials, communities, students, you're hearing from folks, to push once again on that bill. So look, the last thing I'll say is getting any piece of legislation passed is always a challenge. There's so many proposals, so little time. But I feel optimistic this is the year that we can get this particular bill passed. But I'll leave it to others who want to jump in as well if anyone does. Jamie, I'm going to – you're giving me a look, so I'll turn to you.
Sure. So I'll just say that these bills, this whole issue of gun violence prevention was an issue in multiple campaigns this year. And the people of the districts where those issues came up sent us a set of senators and representatives who believe in what we need to do in terms of gun violence prevention. So we are better situated, having gained seats in a year where everybody said that the debate about public safety was going to be about police. We elected gun violence prevention supporters, and we are going to be set up to be able to pass this stuff. And I think that it's a priority for our caucus. We've had those discussions. I think the House Democrats are in a similar position, so I feel optimistic. I just want to add on the previous proposal that the Attorney General was talking about. We are amending Washington's public nuisance law, which has been around since territorial days. And since the 1890s, we have imposed liability on people who manufacture and store gunpowder in a way that's dangerous for the people around them. So there is a long historical tradition in our state of holding businesses responsible for the damage that their products cause. And so to the point about conflict with federal law, I think we are squarely in that exception that was set up in PLACA, and I think have a good chance to provide a 7th victory for Attorney General Ferguson's office. Thank you.
I just want to add one more thing to that. The reason that we have a bigger gun violence prevention majority is because the people of Washington State have voted for these people on this issue. And we will continue fighting to get more and more gun violence prevention champions in our state legislature, in our mayor's offices, in our city councils, and in our county councils. So it is because of the people of Washington that this is happening.
And I'd also like to point out that people of color are disproportionately the victims of gun violence. And we now will have record number members of the Member of Color Caucus, the Legislative Black Caucus, and the Latino Caucus. And I think this year there's going to be an impact because of it.
You mentioned Representative Entenmann is here.
Representative Entenmann is here. I'd like to thank Commissioner Ed Prince from the African American Commission is here. We have a lot of leaders here in South King County. And as I mentioned before, it's of particular interest, I think, to people in South King County.
Any other questions?
I have a question. So a lot of the bills have a lot to do with prevention and people purchasing a gun or assault weapon. Can you address anything around the bills that would have any sort of retroactivity? So people who currently have assault weapons or currently have a gun without a permit.
Well, that's an excellent question, and it is one that we did consider. We had thought about should there be some kind of provision that addressed those who own a gun, should they just be allowed to own it and not take it out of their home, things like that. Those discussions were very intense, and we decided to move forward with a clean bill that simply addressed prospectively. But I will say that I've been in talks with a colleague of mine in the House who is talking about a more narrow version of the registry bill that would apply to assault weapons only that people currently own. I think this is information that law enforcement would like to know, especially given the statistics about the likelihood of them being killed by an assault weapon. And I think that it just makes our communities safer if we know this information. So that bill has not been drafted yet, but that bill is in discussions right now with folks in the House.
Look, we all understand that these measures are not going to eliminate gun violence by next Wednesday. We understand that. And sometimes you get criticism when you start a journey to solve a problem. You say, well, it won't solve the problem tomorrow, so let's not start the journey. That's absolutely backwards. The longer the journey, the more important it is to take the first step. This is an important step. These are 3 important steps. They're based on common sense. We know they work. So we need to start this year in a clean way, and we intend to do it. Anything else? Any easy questions?
I got a question.
Yeah.
So I'm the mother of course, Lorenzo Anderson, the young man that was murdered in Seattle, CHOP. And so I'm trying to make sure, since we're talking about prevention work, how are we making sure what happened in a CHOP don't give us a CHOP too? So what steps are we taking and what actions are you guys taking to prevent that?
Well, one of the things we're doing is training more police officers so we can have more police officers who are available. Look, we have understaffing in many of our communities right now. So we, last year, and we will continue this effort, want to increase the criminal justice training centers so that we have more centers to be able to hire more well-qualified officers who are trained to administer laws with a lack of violence. It's very important. We're heading down that route. What else? Any other questions? With that, thanks a million. Happy holidays. Thank you.